At some point, for almost every married couple on Social Security, one spouse is going to have to walk into this situation alone. The other spouse is gone, and in the middle of the worst weeks of their life, they have to figure out what happens to the money. Does the smaller check just stop? Does it merge with the bigger one? Does someone need to fill out paperwork right away? Or does Social Security handle it automatically? Most people have never been told the actual answer, because it's not something anyone wants to think about while both spouses are alive and healthy. But the rules around survivor benefits are specific. They're generous in ways most people don't expect. And they're also full of small timing decisions that can be worth tens of thousands of dollars over the rest of a widow or widower's life. In this video, we're going through exactly what happens to Social Security when a spouse dies, how much the surviving spouse actually receives, who else in the family might qualify, the one phone call that has to happen immediately, and a lesser-known claiming strategy that can meaningfully increase lifetime income for the survivor. If you or someone in your family is on Social Security as a couple, this is worth 20 minutes. Let's start with the number everyone actually wants to know. If your spouse dies, you don't keep receiving both checks. Social Security doesn't add the two benefits together. Instead, the surviving spouse receives the higher of the two benefits, either their own or their late spouse's, whichever is larger. In most marriages where one spouse earned meaningfully more over their career, this means the surviving spouse effectively steps up to the larger of the two payments. Here's the exact mechanic. If you've reached what's called your survivable retirement age, you receive 100% of what your late spouse was collecting, or was entitled to collect, at the time of death. That survivor full retirement age is not the same as your regular retirement age. It's a slightly different schedule, running from 66 and 6 months for people born in 1959, up to 67 for anyone born in 1962 or later. If you claim survivor benefits earlier than that, as young as age 60, the payment is reduced. At exactly age 60, you'd receive around 71.5% of your late spouse's benefit, and that percentage climbs gradually the longer you wait, until it reaches 100% at your survivor full retirement age. If you're claiming due to a disability, you can start as early as age 50, also at that same 71.5% floor. There's one more detail that matters enormously, and almost nobody explains it clearly. If the higher earning spouse dies before ever claiming their own retirement benefit, and dies before their own full retirement age, the survivor can still receive up to 100% of what that spouse's benefit would have grown to, without being capped by early claiming reductions. And if the higher earner had delayed their own claim past their full retirement age, racking up delayed retirement credits, those extra credits pass through to the survivor benefit too. In other words, a spouse who waited to claim Social Security until 70 isn't just building a bigger check for themselves. They're also building a bigger safety net for whoever outlives them. Survivor benefits aren't limited to spouses who were married for decades and are already retirement age. The eligibility rules cover more situations than most people expect. A surviving spouse generally qualifies at age 60 or age 50 if disabled. But there's also no minimum age at all if you're caring for the deceased worker's child, as long as that child is under 16 or disabled. In that case, you can receive survivor benefits at any age while you're the one raising that child. Divorced spouses can qualify too, which surprises a lot of people. If your marriage lasted at least 10 years, you can generally collect survivor benefits on your ex-spouse's record after they pass away, even if they remarried after your divorce. This benefit doesn't reduce what any current spouse or other survivors receive. Social Security calculates it independently. There's also a category of benefits for the deceased worker's dependent children. A child under 18, or up to 19 if still in high school full-time, or a child of any age who became disabled before 22, can generally receive their own survivor benefit, separate from whatever the surviving spouse gets. One thing worth knowing, Social Security generally requires the marriage to have lasted at least 9 months before the worker's death for a spouse to qualify for survivor benefits, though there are exceptions. For example, if the death was accidental, or if the couple was already married to each other previously. Now let's talk about what actually needs to happen in the days right after a spouse passes away, because there's real money on the table that depends on acting reasonably quickly. Social Security pays a one-time lump sum death payment of $255 to an eligible surviving spouse who was living with the deceased at the time of death. It's a small amount, but it's meant to help cover immediate costs, and you generally need to apply for it within 2 years of the date of death, unless you're already receiving benefits on that record. Here's the important part. You cannot apply for survivor benefits online. This is one of the few Social Security processes that requires a phone call or an in-person visit. You'll want to call Social Security directly to report the death and start the process for both the lump sum payment and any ongoing monthly survivor benefits. If the surviving spouse was already receiving a spousal benefit based on the deceased's record, Social Security will typically convert that automatically to a survivor benefit. But even in that situation, it's worth calling directly because the automatic conversion doesn't always include the lump sum payment or account for whether switching to your own record instead might actually pay more. There's also a practical detail that catches families off guard. If a Social Security payment was already deposited for the month the spouse died, or for any month afterward, that payment generally has to be returned. Social Security benefits are paid for the month they cover, not in advance, and a deposit made after death for covered month needs to go back. This is one of the more uncomfortable parts of the process, but avoiding it or ignoring it can create bigger problems later. This next part is, for a lot of families, the single most valuable piece of information in this entire video because it's a claiming strategy that most widows and widowers never realize is available to them. Because Social Security lets you claim the higher of your own benefit or your survivor benefit, but not both at the same time, there's an order of operations decision that can significantly change how much a surviving spouse collects over their lifetime. Here's how it works. Suppose a widow is eligible for both her own retirement benefit and a survivor benefit from her late husband. If her own benefit is still growing because she hasn't reached 70 yet, she can often choose to claim the reduced survivor benefit first, starting as early as age 60, and let her own retirement benefit keep accumulating delayed retirement credits in the background. Then, once her own benefit maxes out at age 70, she switches over to it, now collecting the larger of the two for the rest of her life. Alternatively, if her own benefit is small compared to what her late husband was earning, it can make more sense to do the reverse. Claim her own reduced retirement benefit early, and then switch to the full unreduced or survivor benefit once she reaches her survivor full retirement age. The right sequence depends entirely on which benefit is larger and how each one grows over time, which is why this isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. It genuinely depends on your specific earnings record versus your late spouse's. But the core point is this. Most people simply claim whichever benefit they're first told about and never revisit the decision. The people who take the time to compare both benefit amounts and sequence the claim intentionally can add meaningful lifetime income, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars over a retirement, just by claiming in the right order. If this applies to your situation, it's worth requesting your own benefit estimate and your survivor benefit estimate side by side from Social Security, and comparing how each one grows if you delay it, before deciding which one to claim first. This is a question that comes up constantly, especially for younger widows and widowers who may go on to remarry. Does getting remarried end your survivor benefit? The answer depends entirely on your age when you remarry. If you remarry before age 60, or before age 50 if you're disabled, you generally lose eligibility for survivor benefits on your former spouse's record while that new marriage continues. If that later marriage ends through divorce, annulment, or death, your eligibility for the original survivor benefit can be restored. But if you remarry at age 60 or later, or 50 or later if disabled, there's no effect on your survivor benefit eligibility at all. You can remarry and continue collecting survivor benefits from your first spouse's record without interruption. This surprises a lot of people, because the assumption is often that remarriage automatically cuts off any benefit tied to a previous spouse, and that's simply not true once you're past that age threshold. If there are dependent children involved, the numbers get a bit more layered. A surviving spouse caring for the deceased child who is under 16 can receive 75% of the deceased's benefit, regardless of the surviving spouse's own age. Each qualifying child can also receive their own benefit, generally also around 75% of the deceased worker's benefit. But Social Security caps the total amount a family can receive on one worker's record through what's called the maximum family benefit, typically somewhere between 150 and 180% of the deceased worker's own benefit amount. If the combined total that spouse and children would otherwise be entitled to exceeds that cap, each person's payment is reduced proportionally, so the total stays under the family maximum. It's worth knowing this exists, so a family isn't caught off guard when the numbers don't simply add up the way they expected. One more update that's genuinely important if anyone in your family worked in public service: teaching, firefighting, police work, or another state or local government job that didn't pay into Social Security. For years, a rule called the government pension offset could reduce, or in many cases completely eliminate, a survivor's Social Security benefit if they also received a government pension from non-covered work. In some of the most severe cases, that offset brought a surviving spouse's Social Security benefit all the way down to zero. That rule was repealed by the Social Security Fairness Act, signed into law in January 2025, and the repeal is retroactive to benefits payable starting in 2024. If a surviving spouse in your family was ever told their Social Security survivor benefit would be reduced or eliminated because of a government pension, and they never bothered applying because of it, that math has changed. It's worth having them contact Social Security directly to apply, since some retroactive payments are still being processed even now. A few closing points worth remembering. First, don't assume the automatic conversion from a spousal benefit to a survivor benefit is always the best outcome. It's worth a direct conversation with Social Security about whether claiming your own record first or later would pay more over your lifetime. Second, don't wait to make that first phone call. Between the lump sum payment deadline, the need to report the death promptly, and the fact that survivor applications can't be filed online, delaying that call can cost real time and occasionally real money. Third, remember that if the deceased spouse claimed their own retirement benefit early, before their full retirement age, that can affect the maximum survivor benefit available. This is sometimes called the REB limb rule. It's a detail worth asking Social Security about directly if your spouse claimed early, since it can change what the survivor benefit calculation looks like compared to if they'd waited. And finally, if anyone in your family was previously told their survivor benefit was reduced or wiped out by the government pension offset, that rule no longer applies. It's worth revisiting. Let's bring this all together. When a spouse dies, Social Security doesn't add both benefits together. The surviving spouse receives the higher of the two, ranging from about 71.5% of the late spouse's benefit at age 60, up to 100% at survivor full retirement age. A one-time $255 lump sum is available, but you'll need to call Social Security directly, since survivor benefits can't be applied for online. For many families, the biggest opportunity isn't just knowing the percentages. It's understanding that you can often claim one benefit first and switch to the larger one later, a sequencing decision that can add meaningful income over the rest of a survivor's life. And if government pension offset rules previously affected your family, that reduction has been repealed and may be worth revisiting. This isn't a topic anyone wants to think about ahead of time, but understanding it before it happens is exactly what makes those first difficult weeks a little easier to manage. If this helped clarify how survivor benefits actually work, subscribe for more breakdowns like this one. We cover the parts of Social Security and retirement planning that most explanations skip right over.